And this is a conversation that started, at least for me, a couple of years ago with the Trust Project. It's something that I think I've come to believe is crucial for the future of news. So I'm just going to talk about 8 ideas. It's, never mind. That is bizarre. Look at that. Whoa. I'm just going to skip those slides. But the problem with these formatics in a digital world is when they just don't look at this, don't look at this, don't look at that. When they travel in social, those flags don't travel with them. There's no way you would know that this piece was necessarily a news analysis. Here is a news story on The Guardian. This is a feature story on The Guardian, and this is an opinion piece on The Guardian. Now, you are supposed to know, as a reader, that the difference between the opinion piece on my left, your right, and the news story on your right, my left, or my right, your left, is different because what? Because there's a picture of the dude and the color is slightly different. I'm going to submit to you now that that is rather subtle and that users probably don't understand that difference. And by the way, just parenthetically, I found this as I was putting this presentation together. There actually is a manual on the New York Times site that I never knew existed. Obviously not a highly trafficked site, but here you can go and find out what a news analysis is. Take a look in the mirror. Look, guys, we got to look at our own websites. This is CNN Money, which I love CNN. I love my boy Brian Stelter. This is at the bottom, but this is what you find at the bottom of every CNN Money story. I mean, is there a single paid advertising product left behind here? I would submit to you no. It's just garbage content. It is just the place where you just shovel the worst crap you can find with the idea that maybe you can make a few extra cents per page view. Now, maybe you do make a few extra cents, actually fractions of a cent per page view, but I would submit that the cost in terms of how this reflects on the content itself is significantly higher. Here's a story that Brian did years ago, well, a little bit, in December actually, about Facebook starting to put warning labels on fake news. And it turns out there was a fake news story attached to that very article, which by the way, was not flagged as fake news. You know, irony alert. We need to be aware of this. Speed kills. We had a really depressing, Mandy actually convened this, a really depressing, I think, conversation about being first and the need to be first. And the need to put, it was in the context of eyewitness media. And would you post an unconfirmed video of a breaking news event? And almost everybody in the room, to a person, said yes. And when asked why, the real answer is that we all kind of imagine this great Mexican standoff over breaking news. Like everybody is sitting there with a gun pointed to one another, and it's like, well, if I don't post it, my competitor's going to post it, and they're going to get all the page views. And, you know, I would post it, but say this is unconfirmed. And I'm like, what are you talking about? That's not journalism. So speed kills. There they are. This is what this was supposed to look like. I don't know why those were up there. Here's just a few examples of really top-notch journalists making some really stupid mistakes on Twitter because of speed, the need to be first, the need to be fast. I think this actually dramatically undermines our credibility. The running of the interns, which is what one publication calls it. Here's an example of how this manifests. This actually happens. So when a Supreme Court decision is handed down, it goes into a room that's around the corner from where this, around the corner from where the media actually sets up TV. And so the interns all hang out there, grab the decision, and run literally as fast as they can to get it on air. You know, this actually happens. And this is what happens as a result. During Obamacare, if you didn't read every single word of that decision, you would have reported it incorrectly because it was like a novel that had a twist at the end. It was like an M. Night Shyamalan movie. It looked for all the world like it was going to be overturned until the very end when it, boom, there's a little twist. Every major network reported this incorrectly. Jill Abramson, who was editor-in-chief of the New York Times at the time, prohibited us from writing a word until Adam Liptak had read the entire decision. This is what the New York Times went up with. Yes, was it 10 minutes later? Yes. Did our readers say, oh my God, you weren't first? No. Did we look good as a result? Yes. Did the world continue to revolve? Did the sun come up the next day because we didn't beat CNN by 16 milliseconds? Yes, it did. Speed kills. We needed to slow down. Pick metrics that matter. When trust is the ultimate metric, you know the metrics we use that are really designed for advertising, page views and uniques, do not serve us well. Those are not good proxies for trust. I want to point you to NPR, which is experimenting with new ways of sort of tracking trust, and they talk about it in terms of empathy, or in terms of, do you care? Does this story make you care? Here's an example. Click if you love quality. They developed a platform. It's in very basic, very like alpha state now, called CareBot, which tracks some of these kinds of analytics. They're different. Here's examples of what they're tracking. So they track things like story rebirth, graphic linger rate. This is meant for visual graphics, by the way. My favorite one is, I don't do Latin, but maybe some of you do. Veni, vidi, whatever that last one is. An indicator used to calculate the number of times users loaded the page for a corresponding URL and then promptly left. Which is a really interesting way of thinking about abandoning. So these are more human metrics that point toward impact and point toward quality and trust, less so. I think they're really onto something with this, and I think we should embrace it. And of course, it has a Slack integration. We're back to CNN Money, and I forgot why, so I'm going to move on. Oh, that's why. So instead of Outbrain at the bottom of the story, which, by the way, is The Guardian discovered exactly the place that converts the best for membership, which is right at the bottom of the story, which is why if you read The Guardian, you see the appeal for membership right at the bottom. Guess what's at the bottom of our stories on the Guardian? It used to be Outbrain for most part. Here, it's Outbrain. So maybe instead of Outbrain, we want something like that. Did you trust this story? Yes or no? Did the story make you care? Yes or no? Tell us why or why not. I mean, this is terribly designed. I did this in about 13 seconds, but you get the idea. Edit like we fact check. I don't understand why it is. If you read the process that PolitiFact goes through to fact check bullshit, it's incredible. I mean, it's systematic, it's in depth. Why is it that we do not edit stories the way we fact check the stories subsequently? It blows my mind. Community is the job. Community is constantly assumed by reporters to be extra, something beyond the act of reporting and writing, and I think those days have got to end. And I'm not going to say much about it because my co-panelists are. But if you can imagine what journalism would be like if journalists ran a restaurant, I think it would probably look a little something like this. Yeah, sure, you get the idea. Again, D-Correspondent hasn't just embraced community a bit. It's core to their business model. They're here. You should go grab them, and they should explain to you how. And this is what results: great journalism. This is a huge scoop that they got simply by co-reporting the story with their readers. Coral Project is here. Greg Barber's floating around. There are platforms out there, including Harkin, which you'll hear about in a minute, and the Coral Project, to do this at scale. There you go. And that is it for me. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so we'll get the next batch of slides up here. In the meantime, I just wanted to introduce myself real quickly. My name's Jennifer Brandel. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Harkin. I was a journalist for a long time in Chicago at WBEZ, which is a public radio station, and started experimenting a few years ago with bringing the public into the process way ahead of publication. And so I'm going to take you through that process and how it is optimized for trust, really. The word Harkin means listen, so if you hear Christmas songs that are about, like, Hark the Herald Angels Sing, that's the origin of this word. And there I am, conveniently wearing the same outfit, so you trust that that is actually me. So I realized that this morning. But what I wanted to talk you through is what Harkin does as a process to bring the community into reporting, and then how that corresponds with trust. And so I'm going to use a study that just came out a couple weeks ago called trustingnews.org. I highly suggest you check it out. It's by Joy Mayer and a bunch of great, smart people from the Reynolds Journalism Institute. They did 14 news outlets they studied over the course of a year. They studied their social media media approach. So I'm going to extrapolate and just say these are good practices beyond social media. So when you see a little yellow box pop up, that's going to be from Trusting News, kind of validating the process that we use. So in short, I believe journalism needs a new relationship model. It's broken as is. Right now, the way that journalists tend to work with the public is by not really working with them, by saying, here's what we think you need to know, on a hill, at a distance, treating the audience like a mass of data or dollars. Instead, what our approach is, which we call public-powered journalism, it's a different model, starts with the question, what do you not know that we could help you figure out? Because after all, our job is to spend all day figuring things out on your behalf. Let us talk to you to see what you would actually like to know. So what's great is in the Trusting Journalism study, they did show that successful strategies were framed around what the organization could do for the public, which is exactly the premise of the model that we have here. So in terms of speed killing, we can see that most news is actually optimized for speed, in part because the audience isn't part of the process until at the very end, after the reporter has to jet to their next story to beat the competitor down the block again for another story. And so the public gets to come into play after the fact, maybe through commenting or other sorts of distribution or reacting. And this is problematic in a lot of different ways. It leaves a lot of opportunities on the floor. The biggest one here for today's purposes is that the public cannot see how journalism works, and it's hard to trust something that you don't understand how it works. And so Harkin, we say, is optimized for trust, thanks to Aaron's great phrase that he said out loud a few months ago, and I heard and it clicked, as to what we're doing is really optimized for showing the process as we go. And so there's 3 main points of contact with the public before publication. The first is collecting their questions, second is letting them have a say in assigning the story, and the third is actually letting them shape the story, follow along, and really see how journalism is made. And again, for today's purposes, there's lots of benefits to this, but showing how decisions get made, we believe earns back trust. And we've also learned that when you bring the public along, it's not about giving up editorial control. You retain editorial control the entire time. You just share your power with the public. And every time you do, you get new powers in return. So when you share the power of asking with the public and you collect their questions, you can get a more diverse stream of story ideas. I've yet to find a newsroom whose editorial table represents the public they're trying to serve, which means it's impossible for them to actually do the types of stories that come from experiences of people outside of the room. So with the Trust Project, they found that if you demonstrate your newsroom reflects your audience's values, this leads to trust. And again, it's hard to reflect their values if you don't have them in the room. So this is a way of getting their values and their perspectives in the room. And just in case you believe they're going to be asking for cat videos and celebrity baby photos, they are not. They have amazing questions that lead to really high-value journalistic content. And these are just a few of the examples from our partners around the world. And then when you share the power of assigning with the public, you can get targeted, authentic marketing, which is fantastic and free. When people are involved, they want to tell everybody they know. So for instance, this woman, Sarah Lynn Pablo, asked about the origin of the Chicago accent. Her question was up for a vote. She galvanized her entire community for the week her question was up for a vote, bringing the next ring of people to that newsroom's website because that newsroom cared about her, so her friends cared about that newsroom. And again, Trusting News found that when you invite users to make a relationship with you part of their social identity, they will join you in your mission. In terms of sharing the power of reporting, I could talk about this for 5 hours at a time, but we don't have that time today. Especially for local news, when you bring a member of the public along with you, it's really transformative, not only for the journalist in terms of getting a different perspective, but for the member of the public who didn't have access to that person or that information without the newsroom. And so in other industries, this is just called user testing, making sure the product you're putting out in the world, whether it's a video or an article, is optimized for who you're making it for. And so the Trust Project found that trust happens when people feel heard. And this entire process is optimized for people to actually be heard, not just feel heard. And so journalists have an opportunity and really an obligation to be listening to the public. So I'm going to take you through the process real quick just to give you a real concrete example of how this stuff works. We created a custom platform to support this because we found that, you can do it with pen and paper. This whole idea you can do with pen and paper, it's just not efficient when you're trying to do it over and over again at scale and when most people are, connected digitally in some way, shape, or form. So we have these different modules where the public can ask questions, they can vote on each other's ideas, they can see what other people have asked, and then it all gets tied into this engagement management system on the back end. And then a third tool we're coming out with, which I'll speak about shortly, is called Open Notebook, which is all about showing your work. So this public-powered approach we found works for every format, doesn't matter what the final product is. It works for every story style, from investigative to human interest and everything in between. And so this is a process for bringing the public along beforehand. We have like a little subway map to make it easy. The purple line is kind of like your express train, where you create a prompt, let your public respond, and then report stories. So I'll give you a quick example of that. So at the BBC, they put out their big story about Brexit immediately. Here's what we know, here's what's going on, here's the High Court's ruling. At the bottom, where Aaron found that people convert the best, this is a great opportunity, a space where you can ask people, what additional questions do you have that weren't covered in the story that we could report for you? And so the public asks those questions, they all flow into this EMS where an editor or reporter can see what's coming in, then assign people to get those answers, and then put it up on the site. And it becomes highly relevant content for the rest of the public because it captures all of these things that weren't in the original reporting. Now, I'll give you another example of an original story creation through this process, which goes along the green line, which means that there's voting involved as well. So our partners at KQED in San Francisco, Olivia is a reporter that runs their series called Bay Curious. And they collect questions about the Bay Area and the people who live there. I know it's a funny pun, right? It's a good name. And so what the Trust Project found is that when you give people something specific to react to, they trust you more. And then also when you communicate your core value along with when you're asking for something, they trust you more as well. So they're doing a really good job of that here. So this guy, Eric, wanted to know something, a phenomenon in his neighborhood. He sees double parked cars every Sunday lining his streets, which is technically illegal. He wants to know, why aren't they ticketed and towed? So he asks Olivia, she gets an alert, and she decides she's going to put it up for a vote to see if the public really cares before she puts her time and money into reporting. And so she puts a voting round up on the site, the little blue bar you can see there, lets the public vote for a few days, and Eric's question ends up winning. So Olivia gets an original story idea and proof that her audience cares before she's reported a word of it. So she does report the story, and it does very well. Not surprisingly, because she tested it, and it showed that it would do well. And in fact, they found at KQED these public-powered stories perform 11 to 15 times better than all of their other content. And so the Trust Project shows, too, that one way of gathering trust is to just sound like a regular person when you're reporting. You know, don't take that journalistic kind of distance. Really just explain things as you would to a friend. And so these are just a few excerpts from the story in which I think the writer is doing a good job of being very relatable and very human about the reporting. The last thing I wanted to show you here in terms of our tool set is Open Notebook, which is a very new tool we're just starting to test out, where the public can see the process as it's being made, get emails directly into their inbox about how the story is going, and then also be able to participate in the reporting itself. So this is just a sample of, this is not something that's live, but I just made it for this, of the highway collapse in Atlanta recently. They could have been using this to collect eyewitness accounts, showing it back to the public, et cetera, as they're going. And so this is a silly comic I made the other day, just to kind of put a point on this, which is that, you know, newsrooms right now, what I've seen the reaction when, you know, this whole crisis in trust is happening, you know, the public is saying, how can I trust you? How do I know, you know, you're not biased? And newsrooms' response, what I've seen for the most part, is just like, no, we're totally trustworthy. We cover lots of different things, and that's all they can really say. But when you do a process like this, you can actually prove that you're not biased because you can say, you're part of this. If you have an idea that's not being covered in the news, if you're not represented, you have an obligation to tell us. You're part of this community. So you can invite people in and allow them to really be part of your reporting, which helps with that objectivity problem. And then proving you're trustworthy overall. So, you know, a lot of people, obviously, the fake news is a subject on everyone's mind. And journalists I see responding just saying, like Aaron said, just trust us, we're journalists. Or being indignant about it, like, I can't believe you would think that, you idiot, of course we're real. Where instead, when you do this process, you can show people what you're doing and say, look, if you don't trust us, here's what we're up to. And you can see for yourself and make an opinion for yourself. So when you put the public at the center of your model, we found that the value follows here. And I'm going to go through these real quick because I know we're short on time. But the return on investment for reporters is they get original stories that are relevant and super popular. The return on investment for the newsroom is that they can actually make money off of this approach by getting higher ad rates, by converting people better, by selling underwriting on this kind of community-supported series. And then this is the whole reason I started Harken, is to really empower the public. So I'll give you a couple quick examples. In Nashville, Tennessee, a regular citizen just wanted to know about Fred Douglass Park. Who was Fred Douglass? And was this supposed to be a Frederick Douglass Park, which is named after a famous abolitionist, because nobody knew who Fred Douglass was. Turns out the newsroom investigated, they called City Hall. City Hall had no idea who Fred Douglass was, and just a couple weeks ago, they decided to clarify the name to Frederick Douglass Park. So this is an 80-year-old slight that the city gave to Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist, that they've corrected now. Now, without the newsroom, a member of the public just calling the city council to ask about this, there's no way anything would have been done. It's because the newsroom was involved that this kind of action could take place. A similar idea happened in Florida, where some parents found their dance studio for their kids closed down suddenly, and they didn't have the time in their busy days to try and hunt down the owner of the studio, get their money back, but the newsroom was able to find that and get justice for the little girls. And then in Chicago, an example, when I was there reporting, a woman wanted to know how much electricity came from fracking. We did 2 stories showing how difficult it was to actually find this answer. We couldn't find the answer. It was a very opaque process. But because we involved her, because we showed her our work, explained how difficult it was to find this answer, she became so personally invested and interested that she ended up quitting her job to become an educator in the community about better energy practices, so that she felt like this was part of her responsibility. And at the end of the day, in a democracy, the citizens are the most important actors. And so if they have the information they need to make change, journalists can be that conduit to help them do that. So at the end of the day, if you put the public at the center of your model, you can earn back trust. So that's a short, long story, but thank you so much for your attention.
All right.
Mandy, get the next slides up, you're going to realize that someone designed hers and did not. What?
Oh,
Microphone.
If you push that way. Yeah.
Sorry. I'm not a technological genius at turning on mics. Anyway, I'm also not a designer, as you're going to find out after watching those beautiful slides. I'm Mandy Jenkins. I'm the head of news at Storyful. If you're not familiar with us, we're a social news verification and insight agency. We work with newsrooms to bring eyewitness media into the reporting that they're doing around the world. I'm also, though, very, very passionate about trust, because that's what we do. That's the business that we peddle in. It's the business I've been in for years, and I think that trust between readers and newsrooms in a lot of ways involves not only incorporating their media into ours and incorporating them into our storytelling along the way, as we've discussed, but it's also about being in these communities in the first place. So I know we're short on time, but mine is the shortest, so you'll see what I mean. So we keep asking this question, and it's come up a lot while we've been here this week. Why don't they trust us? And I think it's a pretty simple answer, really. They don't know who we are. I mean, it's very rare at this point that readers know who we are, and really one of the reasons for that is that trust is local. So people do trust. They have lots of trust. This is just some interesting stats. I should have put my glasses on to see that far, so I'll just turn up here. But these are just some recent studies that came out of Pew. And for instance, 25% of people, and this is in America, but I think it's a great testament to what I'm talking about. They're satisfied with the direction of their national policy, but so many more people trust local policy. They think that there are better ideas coming out of their local communities than there are coming out of the national policies that are coming out of there. And I think that very much comes to the place of something that we understand. People, we've seen lots of studies about this, that people are more likely to trust news from people that they know versus people that they don't. The same thing with their communities versus the country. They are more likely to trust that. And when it comes back to news, this is what things used to be like. People used to actually know journalists in their towns, like they would meet them. They would meet the person that delivered the paper, but they often also went to school with people who became journalists, and they all live in the same town, they all know each other, their kids go to the same school, they shop at the same grocery stores, they live right down the street. That isn't necessarily as likely to happen anymore. One good reason for that is that there are fewer journalists. There's a lot fewer journalists, not only in the U.S., but across the world than there used to be. These are just the cuts we've seen over time. We all know this story. It's depressing and sad. We won't necessarily look at this graph for very long before we all get traumatized by it. But it's important to note that in the U.S. and here in Europe, but this is a kind of based in the US, because this is one I happen to know a little bit more about. These cuts haven't been evenly applied. The cuts really have applied mostly to the middle part of the US. On the coast, the job numbers have roughly stayed the same in Los Angeles, New York, and DC, or gone up in the same time that jobs have dramatically disappeared in journalism across the South and the Midwest and the West. So, and then this is a great stat actually, that 1 in 5 journalism jobs right now in the US are located in one of those 3 cities, which is massive when you really think about how big the US is. So when we don't have, and I told you I wasn't a designer, when we don't have journalists in the towns where news is happening, they parachute in. And this has happened lots over the years. I mean, you see it all the time. And parachuting, though, it's predicated on this belief that, you know, these spots are only worthy of spot coverage. They're only newsworthy every once in a while. There's really nothing else that happens there. There's no other reason to be there. They really kind of flare up. I'm from one of these places, and that's why I'm very passionate about this subject. I'm from Ohio. This is where it is. In the US, they need this map too, so it isn't just aimed at a European audience. They have no idea where it is. Ohio, you might have heard about that, because every election season, political reporters parachute in. They come in there, they tell all these stories, and especially in this most recent election cycle, we're talking a lot about how all of these white working class people, they're all steel workers, they were all laid off, they're all struggling farmers, they're adorable but kind of racist. I mean, that's pretty much what every single story about Ohio is about, especially during the political season. They come in for a day or two, they eat some pancakes, they eat some of our delightful fried foods, they take pictures of it, they tweet about it, they make jokes about rednecks, and then they leave. And everybody wonders why people in the middle part of the country really hate journalists on the coast. And it's because of that. That's definitely not true. And actually, for the record, in Ohio, healthcare, aerospace, and defense are the top industries, not farming, manufacturing, steelworking. Heroin making is a strong, strong contender, but they don't track that right now. This is a great summary from a journalist in Ohio about how this coverage went over this election season and how it still is. Right now, there's a lot of people still parachuting in after the election, like, how did Trump win? Let's go back and do this all over again and tell these same stories again. It's pretty depressing, because I mean, even with the best intentions, parachuting journalism is not going to capture a real portrait. You know, you're really going to only end up getting, I mean, even the best reporters really can only get a caricature of what a red state is like, or what a rural town is like, or what a small town is like. You're not going to get a real feel for it because you're not from there. So the moral of all this, as depressing as that is and as ranty as I might seem, because I'm going kind of fast, I swear it's not all that bad. The means is that when we're talking about trust, and we're talking about especially trust in places where lots of journalism is not happening anymore, we need to show up and we need to be authentic about the communities that we say that we cover. You know, kind of taking on what Jennifer said here, you know, we need to reflect the communities that we say that we're in. And right now, most national media in the US, and I would venture to say that most national media in most countries, don't get to reflect the places that are not in the cities, that are not where these places actually are. So there's a few different solutions that are out there that people are doing, and I think they're great ideas, and I think there's a lot more of it that we can be doing. For one thing, there's some great work that can be done of collaborative, local-driven reporting projects. This is one I have been obsessed with lately, not only because I'm from Appalachia, but because it's really, really great reporting. 100 Days in Appalachia, this is a collaborative effort between West Virginia Public Radio, West Virginia University's journalism school, and a local rural news startup called the Daily Yonder. And they have tons and tons of great stories, really well produced on here. And they're telling real stories about what's happening in this region from people who live in this region, who have been reporting there for years, who grew up there, who live there. I highly recommend checking this out. And I think that it's a great example of what you can do when you can get people who have passion about this together. They can get some funding, and they can actually get these stories out there into a world where people can actually learn a little bit more about the place. But the people who live there also have a news resource that's reflecting exactly the kind of life that they're living. Another thing that we can be doing is actually taking a lot of what we're doing on a national scale to a local level. Thinking, is there something that I'm doing nationally that would really work well as a local version of this? And I really am excited by ProPublica opening an Illinois version of ProPublica. It's not just a bureau. It's not like a little subsect. It's not like this dude over here doing this thing. It is actually a ProPublica for Illinois. And I think it's really exciting to see something like that. And if you know anything about Illinois, there's a lot of corruption, so they're going to have some great work to do there. It's going to be very exciting. And another thing you can do is actually have people that live and work and have always lived and worked in these places working in your newsroom. These are all colleagues or former colleagues of mine who are probably going to be really embarrassed that I take pictures of them when we're on Hangouts. I actually work with a largely remote workforce right now, at least in terms of a distributed newsroom. So we're on Hangouts, we're working virtually together all day. Before my current role, I was at Digital First Media and Project Thunderdome, which is also a distributed newsroom that was across the US. So we were doing this kind of work all the time. And much of the people that were working in that newsroom had a hard time getting jobs afterwards because nobody wants to hire somebody who's living out in Nevada or someone who's living out of a camper in Colorado. I employ that person at Storyful now. She still lives in a camper in Colorado. She's fantastic. But the newsrooms aren't really keen to have remote workforces. They are very much about control. They're very much about having people in the newsroom with them. It's one thing for the industry to be hiring in people from those places, which is already pretty difficult. I know from experience of many years of having to prove that I'm not illiterate, that I can actually work in New York City and not like die on the subway or something. But it's a whole other thing to hire these people and keep them in the new communities where they come from and the communities that they care about. You're seeing a lot more of this now, which I think is exciting. But I don't like that it took what journalists see as some massive election cycle failure to make them think, maybe it's a good idea if I hire someone that lives in Missouri or that lives in Ohio to actually write about Ohio, that they're finally getting there. But I think that is a solution it's easy, it's actually cheaper than hiring a bunch of people in New York, and you get some really good trusting stories that will actually bring the audience in. So those are my solutions. Let's think local.
All right, thank you. Since we did get started a bit late, and this is only a 45-minute panel, we're gonna ad lib here, and actually, if you have questions, the three of us, and I'm just gonna assume this is okay, we'll just hang out here if you have any questions. If you don't, don't feel obligated, But we'll be right out here. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Mandy. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
Okay, I'll write up the description.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay,
Let's do it.
Oh, yes, okay. Oh, shit. I was like, I saw you. I was like, I hope it's okay. Yeah, I'll send you slides. Is that legal? Okay, all right, good. I like the point. No, I mean, I love that you're tweeting, and when you tell us that stuff is happening, we're just like, oh, you're doing something about the wall. Yeah, exactly. You did another one, or?
No, we did something else.
And this is a conversation that started, at least for me, a couple of years ago with the Trust Project. It's something that I think I've come to believe is crucial for the future of news. So I'm just going to talk about 8 ideas